The labyrinthine corridors of the National Broadcasting Center in Shibuya pulse with a chaotic, high-stakes energy. It is the year 2002, and the massive brutalist post-war architecture of the Japan Broadcasting Corporation facility is packed with rushed producers, sound engineers pushing heavy equipment carts, and highly vigilant security personnel. Yet amidst this hyper-professional ecosystem, a terrifying reality unfolds entirely in the open. Inside the sterile, white-tiled walls of the public restrooms, a young teenage trainee, desperate for a coveted performance slot on a highly rated music program known as the Shonen Club, is cornered and subjected to severe, systematic abuse on roughly 5 separate occasions. The perpetrator operates with supreme, unshakable confidence, anchored by the absolute certainty that even if a network executive, a cameraman, or a janitor were to open the door, their terror of corporate retaliation would force them to instantly avert their eyes and walk away in silence. The architecture of the most respected media institution in the country has been seamlessly weaponized into a private hunting ground. The man orchestrating this localized terror is John Hiromu Kitagawa, known to the world simply as Johnny Kitagawa. This is not an isolated anomaly, but the functioning operational standard of an empire that has permanently captured the attention of an entire nation. Deconstructing the absolute, monolithic cultural supremacy of Johnny and Associates is essential for grasping the environment in which Johnny Kitagawa operated for over 6 decades. The atmosphere of Tokyo, spanning the late Showa period through the entirety of the Heisei era, is defined by a glittering, hyper-commercial escapism in the specific geographical triangle formed by the Minato Shibuya and Akasaka wards. A relentless assault of meticulously curated consumerism blankets the concrete. The scramble crossing of Shibuya pulses with hyperkinetic movement, illuminated by multi-story digital billboards that bathe the intersection in an artificial daytime glow even at midnight. Looking down from these screens are the impossibly immaculate faces of Johnny Kitagawa's young men, broadcasting a manufactured reality to a populace grappling with the economic stagnation of the lost decades. They smile benignly, endorsing everything from imported cosmetics and canned coffee to luxury sedans. These young men are not merely pop stars. They represent the absolute pinnacle of the idealized Japanese male aesthetic. They are projected as eternally youthful, profoundly androgynous, non-threatening, and deeply devoted to the millions of young women who migrate to these wards on localized cultural pilgrimages. The streets below smell of sweet Harajuku crepes, damp concrete, exhaust fumes from idling taxis, and the ozone tang of impending summer typhoons. Behind this blinding high-gloss canopy lies a subterranean infrastructure strictly controlled by Johnny Kitagawa. His public narrative is one of unparalleled visionary genius, operating almost as an eccentric wizard behind the scenes. He famously refuses to be photographed by the press or to appear on the very television networks his talent roster so thoroughly dominates. To the young trainees themselves, typically scouted between the incredibly vulnerable ages of 11 and 15, are classified within a vast developmental system known as Johnny's Juniors. They are chosen for a highly specific matrix of physical and psychological traits, an unblemished innocence, a delicate beauty, and a deep, malleable ambition. At any given time, hundreds of these starry-eyed boys are enrolled in the system, hovering in the backgrounds of television broadcasts as backup dancers for established idols. They are pitted against one another in a relentless, silent war to achieve the life-altering prize of debuting, the rare moment they are formalized into a named group. The public consumes this polished illusion voraciously, unaware of the suffocating terror engineered in the windowless basement dance studios, the concrete television production backlots, and the heavily fortified private dormitories, where these boys are physically and psychologically forged. The sheer scale and multi-generational longevity of this operation are rooted deeply in the geographic and psychological origins of its founder. Born in Los Angeles, California in 1931, Kitagawa's early life is steeped in a trans-Pacific duality. His father, Minoru Kitagawa, is a high-ranking priest at a Koyasan Shingon Buddhist temple in Little Tokyo. This environment infuses the boy's worldview with an aura of religious authority, theatrical ritual, and an understanding of absolute, unquestioning devotion from congregants. Crucially, his formative years are spent in the shadow of the golden age of the American entertainment industrial complex. He absorbs the immense grandeur of Hollywood stagecraft and the absolute dictatorial power of the early 20th century studio system, specifically studying the model of total talent control mastered by executives like Louis B. Mayer. Following the devastation of World War II, Johnny Kitagawa returns to a broken Japan, securing work with the United States military advisory groups at Washington Heights, a sprawling housing complex in Yoyogi that would eventually become the site of the 1964 Olympics. He arrives speaking fluent, idiomatic English, bearing a foreign passport, and possessing an operational understanding of rigid, top-down military command structures. He utilizes this Los Angeles background as a potent psychological weapon. In a post-war era, characterized by crushing poverty and national humiliation, Kitagawa represents unassailable power and glittering modernity. In 1962, he forms a local baseball team of neighborhood boys, which eventually transitions into a singing and dancing group, modeled explicitly after the theatrical camaraderie of the musical West Side Story. This establishes a lifelong template for recruitment, masking an insidious grooming process under the guise of paternal mentorship and athletic camaraderie. The physical geography of Johnny Kitagawa's empire is meticulously built to disorient and subjugate the young boys he recruits. He establishes the Gashukujo, exclusive, highly secure residential dormitories situated in some of Tokyo's most affluent neighborhoods, including Harajuku, Roppongi, and Azabujuban. To categorize these spaces simply as dormitories is a profound misnomer. They are not institutional buildings with cinder block walls. They are sprawling, ultra-luxury high-rise penthouses and expansive private homes hidden behind manicured foliage and guarded entrances. A prepubescent boy arriving with a single duffel bag is abruptly thrust into an environment dripping with unimaginable wealth. The apartments feature deep, sound-absorbing carpeting, heavy velvet curtains that block out the reality of the Tokyo skyline, and an atmosphere thick with the scent of expensive catered food and imported colognes. The walls serve as shrines to Kitagawa's power, lined with framed posters of top stars and gleaming gold and platinum records. This sensory overload is a highly calculated grooming tool designed to induce a sense of profound debt, making the outside world seem dull, poor, and undesirable. The architectural layout of these spaces is deeply hierarchical and inherently predatory. The young trainees sleep in large communal rooms on expansive tatami mats, their futons lined up closely together. Johnny Kitagawa's private quarters are invariably situated in close proximity, featuring an adjoining door or direct, unimpeded access to the communal floor. He strips away traditional Japanese boundaries by insisting all boys, regardless of rank, call him you, a linguistic manipulation that replaces the social distance of honorifics like sensei or shasho with an artificial, forced intimacy. During the nocturnal routine, the silence of the luxury apartments amplifies every sound. Survivors describe the agonizing, visceral tension of lying perfectly still in the dark once the lights go out, feigning sleep, They hear the slow sliding of shoji screens, the turning of a brass doorknob, and the soft padding of Johnny Kitagawa's footsteps moving across the deep carpet. The approach is unhurried, saturated with the confidence of absolute impunity. Kitagawa slides into the futon of a selected boy, physically pinning them in the dark. The true architectural and psychological horror lies in the communal silence. Other boys in the room, lying mere feet away, keep their eyes clamped shut, their bodies rigid with fear. They are paralyzed by the knowledge that intervening means not only facing the wrath of their omnipotent employer, but the immediate, irrevocable end of their careers. The physical layout forces the victims to suffer in the intimate, captive presence of their peers, weaponizing shame and creating a collective trauma bond built on mutual cowardice and survival. The immense duration of this operational environment is protected not merely by isolation, but by a structural, absolute silence embedded within the Japanese socio-media apparatus. The atmosphere of the broadcasting hubs is defined by an unspoken law, known natively as sontaku. Sontaku is the preemptive capitulation to the desires of the powerful, the insidious act of guessing what a superior entity wants and accommodating it without explicit orders to avoid conflict. Investigative journalists hear the dark rumors circulating in the Golden Gai bars of Shinjuku. Yet the entire ecosystem operates under the explicit understanding that crossing Johnny and Associates means immediate corporate suicide. The media operates heavily on the Keisha Club system, an exclusionary press cartel that prioritizes access over investigative rigor. The architect of this terrifying corporate shield is Mary Kitagawa, Johnny's older sister. While Johnny handles the creative direction and the intimate grooming aspects in the dormitories, Mary Kitagawa is the ruthless, terrifying corporate enforcer. Operating as the vice president, she commands the media and the money with mafia-like intimidation. If a rival talent agency is featured, or if a publication even subtly hints at Johnny's improprieties, Mary Kitagawa leverages the agency's unparalleled roster of superstars. She threatens devastating boycotts, promising to pull every talent from the network's high-rating dramas, variety shows, and news programs. Motivated entirely by advertising revenue and television ratings, the broadcast networks consistently choose financial security over the protection of children. This systemic moral failure morphs the entire Japanese entertainment press, publishing houses, and broadcast infrastructure into active, heavily guarded co-conspirators. By the late 1980s, the first major fractures in the narrative attempt to surface. In 1988, a former agency member named Koji Kita publishes a tell-all book explicitly detailing the severe systemic abuse perpetrated by Johnny Kitagawa. The Japanese mainstream media entirely ignores the publication. The mechanism of sontaku demonstrates its terrifying power to suppress the domestic narrative, establishing a chilling precedent of impunity. However, the rumors continue to swell into an open secret within the industry. The abuse is rationalized by low-level insiders as a perverse initiation ritual, a twisted loyalty test embedded into the corporate culture, akin to a yakuza blood oath. Submitting to the advances is framed as a transactional rite of passage, proof that a boy is willing to sacrifice his bodily autonomy for the greater good of the agency. When traumatized victims desperately contact agency staff for help, crying that Johnny came into their futon, the official response is devastatingly complicit. They are told that if they want to debut, they have to endure it, as everyone goes through it. In October 1999, a massive structural challenge is launched when the weekly magazine Shukan Bunshun begins a 14-part investigative series. The tabloid explicitly exposes the abuse, the provision of alcohol to minors, and the coercive psychological control utilized in the dormitories. Johnny and Associates immediately launches a fierce, aggressive defamation lawsuit to crush the publisher. Throughout the high-stakes civil trial, mainstream television networks completely boycott coverage, continuing to cast Johnny's talents without interruption. The legal battle climbs through the judiciary until February 2004, resulting in an unprecedented landmark ruling. Japan's Supreme Court finalizes a high court verdict that officially and legally recognizes the essential truth of the abuse allegations published by Shukan Bunshin. The highest court in the land effectively labels Johnny Kitagawa a predator. The logical expectation is an immediate criminal investigation, police raids on the luxury apartments, and a societal reckoning. Instead, the exact opposite occurs. The Japanese mainstream television media completely ignores the verdict. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police stubbornly refuse to open a criminal investigation, and public prosecutors decline to press charges, allowing elite corporate lawyers to weaponize the statute of limitations. Furthermore, crucial physical evidence has long been destroyed. Terrified boys, gripped by profound shame and disgust, routinely washed themselves in the opulent bathrooms of the Gashakujo, literally washing away the vital DNA evidence required for processing at government-backed centers like Cure Time. The domestic media blackout holds entirely firm. The Supreme Court ruling vanishes into the void of sontaku, and the predation is allowed to continue unabated for another decade. The timeline reveals a chilling systemic mechanism. The gap between 2004 and the ultimate collapse represents 2 lost decades of justice. In March 2012, a young trainee named Kawan Okamoto became one of Johnny Kitagawa's earliest victims of that era. This event highlights that the predatory environment operated flawlessly despite the Supreme Court ruling. The psychological toll on the victims deepens, complicated by the massive fame many eventually achieve. To survive the environment often means ascending to the glittering heights of superstardom. This forces the survivors into a horrific cognitive dissonance. They owe their immense wealth, their mansions, and the adoration of millions entirely to the man who systematically exploited them during their formative years. This dynamic induces a severe collective Stockholm syndrome. For decades, some of the most famous men in Japan fiercely and publicly defend the architect of their careers, further silencing the broken trainees who wish to speak out. The victims remain trapped, viewing their silence as the mere toll demanded at the gate of starlight. In July 2019, the untouchable architect Johnny Kitagawa dies of a subarachnoid hemorrhage at the age of 87. Having successfully evaded criminal prosecution in a court of law, he is universally mourned as a cultural titan and a national hero. A grand farewell is held at the massive Tokyo Dome, attended by political elites. The Prime Minister of Japan offers official condolences. The media produces countless hagiographies, entirely omitting the judicially recognized predatory history. Hundreds of silent victims are forced to watch the canonization of their abuser broadcast live across the country. The empire appears to have survived its creator intact. The niece of the founder, Julie Keiko Fujishima, inherits the presidency, and the multi-billion yen machinery continues to turn. The ultimate destruction of the fortress requires alternative investigatory mechanics. It takes an entity entirely immune to the domestic blacklisting tactics to pierce the armor. In March 2023, the British Broadcasting Corporation dispatches reporter Weaponized to investigate the whispers. The broadcast of the documentary acts as the ultimate devastating form of gaiyatsu, or foreign pressure. The film does not merely expose the long-rumored history. It aggressively interrogates the deep systemic complicity of the Japanese media. This massive international broadcast cracks the foundation of the domestic blackout. Emboldened by the international spotlight, Kawan Okamoto, the former trainee assaulted in 2012, executes a highly strategic investigative maneuver. On April 12, 2023, he holds a historic press conference, putting a face and name to the victims and detailing the exact nature of the 15 to 20 assaults he endured. Crucially, Okamoto bypasses the domestic press clubs that ignored the story for decades by holding the event at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. This brilliantly forces international wire services to pick up the narrative, cornering the domestic networks into reporting on the allegations under the guise of covering a foreign press event. By May 19, 2023, former trainees Yasushi Hashida and Kawan Okamoto are testifying at a joint opposition party hearing within the National Diet, forcing political acknowledgement of the crisis. Faced with unprecedented global outrage and a subsequent inquiry by the United Nations Human Rights Council, the corporate entity implements standard damage control mechanics. They establish an external special team for recurrence prevention to conduct an internal fact-finding mission. Led by Makoto Hayashi, a former prosecutor general with immense legal gravitas, the team operates like a rigorous corporate autopsy. They conduct closed-door, heavily protected interviews with dozens of victims and agency executives, forensically analyzing the governance structure. On August 29, 2023, the special team releases a devastating, uncompromising report. The findings strip away the dark mystique of corporate initiation rituals to reveal an uncontrolled, predatory paraphilia enabled entirely by a total power imbalance. The investigators explicitly highlight Johnny Kitagawa's sexual deviance as the fundamental root cause, confirming the timeline of abuse stretches back to the early 1970s. The team discovers a deliberate absence of basic corporate safeguards. No internal whistleblowing system, no conduct regulations, and no harassment training. The most damning legal conclusion revolves around the concept of unaction. The report proves that the board of directors, including the current president, Julie Keiko Fujishima, had a strict legal and fiduciary obligation to investigate the rumors to protect their talent, yet willfully and systematically chose to ignore them, legally facilitating the continued exploitation. The verdict handed down by the investigative team serves as a quasi-judicial ruling in the court of global public opinion. They officially demand the immediate resignation of the president to allow for any hope of corporate rehabilitation. On September 7, 2023, the agency holds a historic, hours-long press conference. Julie Keiko Fujishima publicly admits to the multi-generational abuse and announces her resignation in disgrace, marking the official end of the denial era. The sudden realization that the beloved national treasures of Japanese pop culture are the products of an industrial-scale operation triggers an irreversible, seismic shockwave through society. Operating under the harsh glare of global human rights standards, major international and domestic corporate sponsors rapidly panic. Corporations that relied on the agency for decades, such as Suntory, Nissan, and McDonald's Japan, instantly sever their highly lucrative advertising contracts, marking the violent, public death of sontaku in the corporate sector. A senior agency figure, Yoshihiko Inohara, stands before flashing cameras and officially acknowledges that sontaku is rampant in Japan, giving grim validation to the culture of unspoken favors and fearful silence that had infected the nation's journalism. Television networks, such as TV Asahi, are forced to confront their own complicity, issuing humiliating public statements. Major broadcasters pledge to strictly enforce human rights due diligence, a concept virtually unheard of in the deeply insular entertainment industry prior to the scandal. The case catalyzes a vital national conversation regarding male vulnerability, sparking a massive increase in visibility for government support helplines. The public is educated on the psychological nuances of grooming and the critical protocols for reporting, recognizing that operating under the name of a globally condemned predator is morally and economically untenable. The original corporate identity is erased. The sprawling talent management arm is rebranded, and the towering logo is physically stripped from the headquarters in Akasaka. The iconic names of wildly popular groups are hastily rebranded. The multi-billion yen entity is drastically restructured into a shell company named Smile Up, legally mandated solely to handle the intake and financial compensation of victims before its eventual dissolution. A new, theoretically independent talent management agency, Starto Entertainment, is spun off to manage the surviving rosters of talent, desperate to distance itself from the taint of the founder. However, the legal mechanics of this compensation phase quickly devolve into an intense adversarial bureaucracy. Facing financial ruin, the transitional agency adopts an aggressive legal posture regarding the legitimacy of claimants. They release public statements citing the grave risk of fraudulent claims, warning that opportunistic actors are utilizing the harrowing testimonies of real victims to construct fabricated stories. This calculated maneuver subtly attempts to reclaim a sliver of moral high ground while establishing a highly intimidating vetting process. Genuine victims, who have already endured catastrophic trauma, are forced to navigate this system, terrified of being publicly labeled as greedy liars. This echoes the profound alienation many faced when first speaking out. Kawan Okamoto, fighting through visible anguish, recounted the brutal secondary traumatization from his own blood relatives. His family accused him of fabricating the horrific stories for fame or financial gain, highlighting the deep societal brainwashing that preferred to view sons as opportunistic rather than victims of a corporate machine. Despite this, Okamoto publishes a deeply personal tell-all book, cementing his place in history as the primary whistleblower. He, alongside Yasushi Hashida, continues to act as a vocal, tireless advocate, fighting to ensure the momentum for systemic justice does not stall. Beneath the highly publicized restructuring, profound questions remain painfully unresolved. While television networks engage in performative soul-searching, the powerful executives who actively facilitated the silence largely retain their highly compensated positions across the broadcasting landscape. There has been no mass resignation of the enablers. The advocates continue a grueling battle, pushing for financial restitution not just from the dismantled agency, but from the complicit media conglomerates that actively profited off the suffering. Beyond the visible whistleblowers lies the dark reality of an estimated hundreds of unknown survivors. Many of these victims are now middle-aged men, struggling with psychological scars, substance abuse issues, and fractured relationships inflicted in the darkened rooms of the Gasshukujo decades ago. The empire built by Johnny Kitagawa on the illusions of stagecraft has decisively fallen, its golden facade permanently stripped away to reveal the agonizing truth beneath. While Julie Keiko Fujishima has stepped down and the ruthless media enforcement pioneered by Mary Kitagawa has fractured, the true cost of their familial enterprise remains incalculable. The surviving idols still sing, the talent continues to perform, and the blinding digital billboards of Shibuya still cast their artificial daytime glow over the scramble crossing. But the deep, indelible shadows cast by Johnny Kitagawa's predation and the lives ruined in the pursuit of a manufactured dream remain deeply entrenched in the concrete. An entire industry's innocence is permanently shattered, haunted by the profound failure of a nation that actively chose to look away from the darkness in order to protect the light.
ご列席のご一同の皆様に申し上げます。これより儀式万端相整いました。よって手締めの儀滞りなく 行わさせていただきます。私合衆国ジャニー組総長といたしましては、我が区民による踊り歌の一曲もご提供すべきところ、牧業、金とあまりにも騒動しくご近所様にご迷惑をこれ以上かけちゃ申し訳ないと思いますので、ご遠慮させていただきます。ことを考慮し、私自身による手締めのみとさせていただきます。田辺会長の今後ますますのご活躍を念じ、なおかつここにご参列の皆々様のご健勝をお祈り申し上げ、共に、最年長の私として、遅刻した罰としても参列の手締めを、ご唱和ください。それでは皆様お手を拝借。はい、よー